reached them, the children saw with relief that it was not anybody frightening at all, but somebody they knew. Mr. Poe. Mr. Poe was a friend of Mr. and Mrs. Baudelaire's, whom the children had met many times at dinner parties. One of the things Violet, Klaus, and Sunny really liked about their parents was that they didn't send their children away when they had company over, but allowed them to join the adults at the dinner table and participate in the conversation as long as they helped clear the table. The children remembered Mr. Poe because he always had a cold and was constantly excusing himself from the table to have a fit of coughing in the next room. Mr. Poe took off his top hat, which had made its head look large and square in the fog, and stood for a moment, coughing loudly into a white handkerchief. Violet and Klaus moved forward to shake his hand and say, "How do you do?" "How do you do?" said Violet. "How do you do?" said Klaus. "How do you?" said Sunny. "Fine, thank you," said Mr. Poe, but he looked very sad. For a few seconds, nobody said anything, and the children wondered what Mr. Poe was doing there at Briny Beach when he should have been at the bank in the city where he worked. He was not dressed for the beach. "It's a nice day," Violet said finally, making conversation. Sunny made a noise that sounded like an angry bird, and Klaus picked her up and held her. "Yes, it is a nice day," Mr. Poe said absently, staring out at the empty beach. "I'm afraid I have some very bad news for you children." The three Baudelaire siblings looked at him. Violet, with some embarrassment, felt the stone in her left hand and was glad she had not thrown it at Mr. Poe. "Your parents," Mr. Poe said, "have perished in a terrible fire." The children didn't say anything. "They perished in a fire that destroyed the entire house," Mr. Poe said. "I'm very, very sorry to tell you this, my dears." Violet took her eyes off Mr. Poe and stared out at the ocean. Mr. Poe had never called the Baudelaire children "my dears" before. She understood the words he was saying, but thought he must be joking, playing a terrible joke on her and her brother and sister. "Perished," Mr. Poe said, "means killed." "We know what the word perished means," Klaus said crossly. He did know what the word perished meant, but he was still having trouble understanding exactly what it was that Mr. Poe had said. It seemed to him that Mr. Poe must somehow have misspoken. "The fire department arrived, of course," Mr. Poe said. "But they were too late. The entire house was engulfed in fire. It burned to the ground." Klaus pictured all the books in the library going up in flames. Now he'd never read all of them. Mr. Poe coughed several times into his handkerchief before continuing. "I was sent to retrieve you here and to take you to my home, where you will stay for some time while we figure things out. I am the executor of your parents' estate. That means I will be handling their enormous fortune and figuring out where you children will go. When Violet comes of age, the fortune will be yours, but the bank will take charge of it until you are old enough." Although he said he was the executor, Violet felt like Mr. Poe was the executioner. He had simply walked down the beach to them and changed their lives forever. "Come with me," he held out his hand. Violet had to drop the stone she was holding. Klaus took Violet's other hand, and Sunny took Klaus's other hand, and in that manner, the three Baudelaire children, now the Baudelaire orphans, were led away from the beach and from their previous lives. It is used.
That is crazy work. So, three children are now without their parents due to a fire. And as of now, they don't know what caused it. That is crazy. Like, what? Should we read on, or should we do a chapter a day or two chapters a day? How should we do this? Should we do one chapter or two chapters a day? Should we do one or two chapters a day, chat? We got to get this book done so we could go to so we could go to the next one. One or two chapters a day.
For me to describe to you how terrible Violet, Klaus, and even Sunny felt in the time that followed. If you have ever lost someone very important to you, then you already know how it feels. And if you haven't, you cannot possibly imagine it. For the Baudelaire children, it was of course especially terrible because they had lost both of their parents at the same time, and for several days they felt so miserable they could scarcely get out of bed. Klaus found he had little interest in books. The gears in Violet's inventive brain seemed to stop. And even Sunny, who of course was too young to really understand what was going on, bit things with less enthusiasm. Of course, it didn't make things any easier that they had lost their home as well, and all of their possessions. As I'm sure you know, to be in one's own room, in one's own bed, can often make a bleak situation a little better. But the beds of the Baudelaire orphans had been reduced to charred rubble. Mr. Poe had taken them to the remains of the Baudelaire mansion to see if anything had been unharmed, and it was terrible. Violet's microscope had fused together in the heat of the fire.
Damn.
Klaus's favorite pen had turned to ash,
Golly.
and all of Sunny's teething rings had melted.
Aw.
Here and there, the children could see traces of the enormous home they had loved. Fragments of their grand piano, an elegant bottle in which Mr. Baudelaire kept brandy, the scorched cushion of the window seat where their mother liked to sit and read. Their home destroyed, the Baudelaires had to recuperate from their terrible loss in the Poe household, which was not at all agreeable. Mr. Poe was scarcely at home because he was very busy attending to the Baudelaire affairs, and when he was home, he was often coughing so much he could barely have a conversation. Mrs. Poe purchased clothing for the orphans that was in grotesque colors, and itched. And the two Poe children, Edgar and Albert, were loud and obnoxious boys with whom the Baudelaires had to share a tiny room that smelled of some sort of ghastly flower. But even given the surroundings, the children had mixed feelings when, over a dull dinner and boiled potatoes and blanched, the word blanched here meaning boiled, string beans, Mr. Poe announced that they were to leave his household the next morning. "Good," said Albert, who had a piece of potato stuck between his teeth. "Now we can get our room back. I'm tired of sharing it. Violet and Klaus are always moping around and are never any fun." "And the baby bites," Edgar said, tossing a chicken bone to the floor as if he were an animal in a zoo and not the son of a well-respected member of the banking community. "Where will we go?" Violet asked nervously. Mr. Poe opened his mouth to say something, but erupted into a brief fit of coughing. "I have made arrangements," he said finally, "for you to be raised by a distant relative of yours who lives on the other side of town. His name is Count Olaf." Violet, Klaus, and Sunny looked at one another, unsure of what to think. On one hand, they didn't want to live with Poes any longer. On the other hand, they had never heard of Count Olaf and didn't know what he would be like. "Your parents' will," Mr. Poe said, "instructs you to be raised in the most convenient way possible. Here in the city, you'll be used to your surroundings, and this Count Olaf is the only relative who lives within the urban limits." Klaus thought this over for a minute as he swallowed a chewy bit of bean. But our parents never mentioned Count Olaf to us. Just how is he related to us exactly? Mr. Poe sighed and looked down at Sonny, who was biting a fork and listened closely. He is either a third cousin 4 times removed or a fourth cousin 3 times removed. He's not your closest relative on the family tree, but he is the closest geographically. That's why, if he lives in the city, Violet said, why didn't our parents ever invite him over? Possibly because he was very busy, Mr. Poe said. He is an actor by trade and often travels around the world with various theater companies. I thought he was a count, Klaus said. He is both a count and an actor, Mr. Poe said. Now, I don't mean to cut short our dinner, but you children have to pack up your things, and I have to return to the bank to do some more work. Like your new legal guardian, I'm very busy myself. The 3 Baudelaire children had many more questions for Mr. Poe, but he had already stood up from the table, and with a slight wave of his hand, departed from the room. They heard him coughing into his handkerchief, and then the front door creaked shut as he left the house. Well, Mrs. Poe said, you 3 had better start packing. Edgar, Albert, please help me clear the table. The Baudelaire orphans went to the bedroom and glumly packed their few belongings. Klaus looked distastefully at each ugly shirt Mrs. Poe had bought for him as he folded them and put them into a small suitcase. Violet looked around the cramped, smelly room in which they had been living. And Sonny crawled around solemnly, biting each of Edgar and Alan's shoes, leaving small teeth marks in each one so she would not be forgotten. From time to time, the Baudelaire children looked at one another, but with their future such a mystery, they could think of nothing to say. At bedtime, they tossed and turned all night, scarcely getting any sleep between the loud snoring of Edgar and Albert and their own worried thoughts. Finally, Mr. Poe knocked his head into the bedroom. Rise and shine, Baudelaires, he said. It is time for you to go to Count Olaf's. Violet looked around the crowded bedroom, and even though she didn't like it, she felt very nervous about leaving. Do we have to go right this minute? She asked. Mr. Poe opened his mouth to speak, but had to cough a few times before he began. Yes, you do. I am dropping you off on my way to the bank, so we need to leave as soon as possible. Please get out of bed and get dressed, he said briskly. The word briskly here means